Alistair, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you mind just doing a brief introduction for our audience, a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, no problem. So I am Dr. Alistair Bryce-Clegg. As you said, I'm an early years consultant and author. So I write lots of books about early years and child development. I also own ABC Does, which is an early years consultancy. And I have the great pleasure of travelling all over the world talking to practitioners about the joy of early years. So I have an ace job and I love it. I love the Childcare Expo, or Childcare Education, I suppose we should call it, because it is a great space for the community to get together. And I've been doing these for a long time now, probably way pre-COVID, and it's always a great space because you meet old friends that you haven't seen for ages. You always meet new friends, but you get to chat to people about what's happening in their early years world, because it can get easy to be removed from the real world of early years. I have the great pleasure that I spend a lot of my time in settings with practitioners, but it's very easy to step outside of that and we quickly get de-skilled. And it's spaces like this where people can share what they are going through, the good bits and the bad bits, which means that then we can get much better support for practitioners. So it's just a great space to learn more, share more, meet some people. It's great.
Over the years, you've been a vocal advocate for play as a central part of early childhood learning.
Yeah.
What do you think holds some settings back from fully embracing a play-led education, and how do you help them overcome those barriers?
It's a really good question and probably hasn't got a very short answer, but I will do my best. So I think historically education hasn't been based around play, even preschool education, because there is so much pressure from an outcomes-driven, often government agenda around children need to achieve this by a certain age, especially with things like baselines, foundation stage assessments, all the things you've been through over the years. So even if you're not school-based, you get pressure to, by the time they come to us, can you make sure that they can all sit on the carpet, write their names, do all I can recognise their numbers. So play is the first thing to get squeezed out.
Yeah.
And also in the English language, we have one word for play, where other countries have multiple words for different sorts of play. And I think if you talk to anybody and say, what is play? And they're not in early years, play is like a fun thing, a frivolous thing, a thing that happens after the work. And actually what we know, as Maria Montessori said, play is the work of children. And I think what's great about where we are now with things like the internet and also research-based practice is we're finding out so much more from current science and research around brain development, emotional and social development, neurodiversity, that shows us that play actually is the thing that equips children with all of the life skills that they need. So the more quality play they can have, the more likely they are to be resilient, have high levels of well-being, have really good mental health, all of the things that are going to be really important. So I think research is helping us to shift the pendulum, but still we are very much based in a culture of children doing activities that are linked to topic that have a particular outcome.
I know from speaking with yourself and the work that you do, and that you've been developing tools that help to make the scientific research on child development more accessible to educators. So what I'd love to know, I think what our audience of this, how do you ensure that these insights are applied in a way that makes a real difference in children's experiences?
So what I found from my education journey personally was that I was never like a high performer in school. I was always too busy being distracted and doing other things. So I kind of got through my exams, but just kind of got through them. And then I found teaching, which for me became a massive passion. I found something I was really good at. Yeah. And I think because I found something I was good at, I then flourished and excelled in it. And then when I became a head teacher, my governors said to me, you can either do a MPQH, which was a brand new qualification, or you can do a master's. And I thought, I can't do a master's. But also the MPQH is really new, and I didn't want to do it because it was brand new. And so I said, okay, I'll do a master's. And over 2 years, I did a master's in education at university and got it and really enjoyed the process, although I didn't find it easy, but really enjoyed it. And then eventually went on to do a doctorate, which is something I thought I would never do. But I was so passionate about what I was doing my doctorate in, which was play, that actually, yes, it's very hard to do, but the process I found really useful. So I apply my own thirst for knowledge around research also with my own restrictions or inabilities to be really focused at a level that I know lots of people are. So what I basically do now is try and take the research that I'm fascinated by and then decant it into, not water it down, but just make it accessible. Because there's nothing worse than if you're a really hard-working practitioner that's really putting your all in and you've got very limited spare time, that somebody says, read this really interesting article about research in neurodiversity, and you're like, I've got kids, I've got cats, I've got a life, I'm knackered. But if you can say, right, I can distill this for you into something that's really accessible and also relevant to your practice, and then say, and if you want more information, here's the link, then it's way more likely that more people will be able to access that information. So whilst I know there are loads of people that love reading the research, there are also loads of other people that haven't got the time, would love to do it, but just can't. So what I'm trying to do is find a balance where we say, I can bring you the really current science and research around our profession, but I can package it in such a way that I give you the headlines and then access to the rest of the stuff if you want it. But at least the headlines might make you have a conversation, might make you think differently, might make you change your practice.
So making it so easier to digest, I guess. And
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. And particularly for the time or situation.
And it's not about intelligence, it's not about a thirst for knowledge, it's about time. It's about being a practitioner who, at the moment in our sector, even though there's a really good buzz and there always is, we are underfunded, we are underappreciated, there's lots of governmental pressure, there's lots of parent pressure. So when you are managing all of that on a daily basis and your own life, probably the last thing you've got time for when you sit down for the 2 minutes that you've got before you fall asleep is for somebody to say, and read this really interesting article. But I know there's stuff in that science and research that will make a definite difference to not only your practice, but to the children that you're working with. So if we can find lots of ways of presenting that without diluting it, that's the ultimate aim.
That's it. You've worked across many different types of settings in early years and education.
Yeah.
What do you see as the most significant shifts in early years education over the years? I'm going to ask that question just to read it again. Sorry. You've worked across many different types of settings. Across early years and education. What do you see as the most significant shifts in early years education over the years, and how have you adapted your approach to stay relevant and impactful?
And again, that's a really broad question because it depends where you are and who you're working with. So having a chat this morning with some practitioners from a Packaway preschool, and we were talking about the fact that they're in a church hall and they're very much under their own steam and they're really invested in play. But I was also having a chat with a reception teacher who basically said, I love everything you talk about, but my senior leadership wouldn't let that happen in our space because I've got to get those children to a certain level by the time they go into year one, otherwise they won't be at the level they need to be at by year 6. So basically she was saying, I get to do a little bit of play for the first half term, but by January, my sand and my water's gone because the writing tables start to come in. So there is a huge difference within our sector in terms of practice. So you might go somewhere to maybe a private nursery, and I might see practice in a private nursery that's really adult-led and outcome-driven, which means the children get a very limited diet. But then there are other nurseries I work with where it's very child-led and play-driven. So I think what I've seen over the hundreds and thousands of settings that I've been in is that there is a discrepancy. There's not a consistency in terms of practice. And partly that's because of subsequent governments with subsequent policies. And, bodies like Ofsted, who have expectations, and those expectations are interpreted by settings, and parental pressure. So parents who want the best for their children. And it's really hard as a parent. If you say to most parents, think back to how you learned to read and write, they go to the formal bit. Nobody says, oh, I appreciate that actually when I was hanging upside down from a tree, that was the beginnings of my writing development. So when as a setting you're saying we do loads of outdoor physical stuff to develop writing, parents are like, hang on, I'd rather have a reading book and I'd rather have you send home some key words for us to learn. So I think one of the big jobs that we've got to do as a sector is try and re-educate government. And again, we've got a new government and they're making lots of really positive noises around our sector, which is brilliant, but also re-educate parents around what the science and research says. So no personal preference, but we know so much more about brain development now than we did when I started 30 years ago. We know so much more about neurodiversity than we did 30 years ago. But yeah, a lot of the practice that I see is the same practice that I saw and did 30 years ago. And the reason, or the thing that will make that change, is policy. Because if policy changes, then practitioners have permission to breathe and also permission to do that kind of extracurricular training. That means you can refresh yourself around what the current thinking is and apply that in your space.
I certainly get the sense from the sector that there's an appetite for change.
Absolutely.
It's a really interesting point about the permission to change.
Yeah.
I think that,
I think people are, if that's all you've ever known.
Yeah.
So lots of people I work with are brilliant practitioners and they do what they've always done. And sometimes what we value around what children can do is not the important stuff. So sometimes I work with a setting where they'll say, we managed to get all of our children sitting with their legs crossed to their arms folded quietly on the carpet. And again, some of the conversations we have around that is, but they're 3, is that one of the top things that a 3-year-old wants to experience?
Yeah.
Are you a good practitioner if you can get them sitting still? Or do we need to rethink what's authentic development for a 3-year-old, and good practitioners reflect authentic development? But why are you getting your children to sit still and quiet? Because somebody over there is saying good practice is when you can get them sitting still and quiet. So we need to change some of the messages, especially the people that lead within our sector and beyond, that will give practitioners permission to go back to the authentic child.
Certainly the framing over time has been compliance is is the outcome you're looking for in terms of a child's development, which now the science tells us that is very, very different. And we should look at, I think you once described it to me as for children to learn best, they have to be comfortable with their bodies.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a really great example, I think.
I think there's some really interesting research, talking about the research, that was done with kindergarten children, and there were 2 groups, one that had a play-based approach to learning and one that had a more formal approach to learning. And when they came to the end of their kindergarten, the ones that had the more formal learning were no further ahead academically than the ones that weren't. But what was interesting was the ones that had a more play-based approach showed more aptitude for resilience, curiosity, drive, well-being. So not only do you get the academic stuff, but you get this whole raft of those other dispositions for learning that actually you need more of that and less of the academic stuff at this age, because that's what's going to empower you to succeed when you become adults and inhabit the adult world of work.
Yeah, it's like the play-led approach helps develop core skills much faster, and therefore the functional skills like English, maths, or reading, writing come along with that journey, as opposed to
and ultimately play, and we're going to be talking about this in our seminar next, play is engaging. And when you are engaged, you are like ready for the world to tell you what the world's got to tell you. If somebody says, come, sit, cross your legs, sit up straight, be quiet and listen, then for a lot of children that just means shut down, shut down, shut down. So rather than take children out of play to give them learning, what we want to do is take learning into play where they are at their most receptive.
Looking ahead, what role do you think creativity will play in early years education, and how can settings foster an environment where both educators and children can thrive in the most creative learning spaces?
So I think you have to go back and look at what is creativity. So I think still we think about it as being like art and dance and music, or we talk about creative people as if you are born creative or not creative. And again, what the science tells us is everybody is born with the potential to be creative. You just need to feed that creativity. And creativity comes from safe failure, so being allowed to try multiple options to get to a conclusion. And also it comes from a level of confidence that failure is okay. So when we are giving children outcome-driven activities that say, come to this table and we're all going to make a thumb pot out of clay, or come to this table and we're all going to make a fish out of a paper plate, or come to this and we're all going to do this activity. What again the research says is children lose the ability to be creative because they learn subconsciously that in education I will be given options, and an adult will define what those options are and that outcome. So again, no surprise, going back to play is a safe space that allows children to try multiple solutions to any one problem, and also they're very engaged in play. So in terms of building true creativity, children need to feel secure, but also having lots of opportunity to experience things and to try and to fail, to try and succeed, and then apply that success in a range of different scenarios. So if we want true creativity, we need to go back to what is creativity and how do we know, and do we create an environment and a curriculum that really values creativity, or have we got one eye on the outcome and therefore we begin just to teach to the outcome, which actually takes away lots and lots of opportunities to develop that creativity.